It is not so much about, like you said, it's not about predicting the future. It's about really trying to anticipate what we can take inventory of in terms of possible futures and then prepare for what we think are the most likely or the most damaging or, the scenarios within that range that really leave us the most exposed and give us the most opportunity.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Keynote Curators Podcast. I'm Seth Deckman, your Keynote Curator. And today we're exploring everything technology, AI, digital transformation, and what it means to be human in the context of all of that. Our guest, Kate O'Neill, the tech humanist. Kate, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Seth. I'm excited to talk with you about all this. There's a lot to explore.
There sure is. I mean, all those topics are everywhere. And as I've learned from you, every moment forward into the future doesn't mean less technology. It actually means more technology. So we're going to explore that and how it inundates our lives, absorbs and saturates everything. But really, how we can navigate, manage, and, have an optimal life, both professionally and personally, moving around this over inundated world of technology. We're going to get right into the heart of the matter. I just want to say hello to our subscribers, our listeners, our viewers. Thank you for coming back. Subscribe, like, love us, comment. There's going to be Kate's book links are going to be in the show notes, and her speaker profile is going to be in the show notes. Kate, let's get into the heart of the matter here. And we're going to start with your book, What Matters Next. I think it, correct me if I'm wrong, came out in the very beginning of this year. There it is, What Matters Next. I'm going to leave it to you to kind of give us on the main idea and really the thesis. But I just, knowing you for many years and following you and reading your books, just some broad strokes. You're saying, look, instead of trying to predict the future, we're not telepathic here. We can do our level best. Get prepared. And then what are you going to prepare for? Are you going to prepare for a doomsday kind of, negative, apocalyptic, killer robot type thing? Or are you going to say, hey, how can I prepare, be ready to enhance my experience as a human being in this world of digital oversaturation? So it's kind of a word salad. I'll have you, the smarter one of us, to land that plane.
I like a word salad personally. I'm a vegan,
Okay.
so it appeals to my my sense of salad rightness for meals. But no, I think you did a really good job of beginning to describe the book concept. I'll just take it back to a little bit of the origin story because I've been working in the space that I describe as the intersection of four main topics, which is tech, humanity, business, and the future. And I've been speaking in that space, like working in that space as an analyst and a consultant and advisor for a lot of years. I've been working in the technology space for 30 years. And over the course of all that time, especially in the last few years, what I've noticed in speaking more and more with executives and leadership audiences is that increasingly you'd hear from people how daunted they feel by the future, the uncertainty about the future, and how hard it is to make decisions about the future. And some of the factors are, things just feel like they're changing all the time. And, you can't get a bearing on where things are going to be tomorrow, let alone in a year, 5 years, whatever. And that there are all these change factors like climate change and geopolitical upheaval, not to mention tech and AI, that really feel like they're just too big and complex and, wicked problems to try to get your head around, let alone combining them and trying to understand those implications. So before your listeners are tuning out like, oh my gosh, you just made me so freaked out describing the situation. That's what I was feeling or hearing from people is that they are freaked out about it. And so I thought, what I feel like I can do in this situation is really synthesize this, kind of put together a model that looks at the landscape and tries to help us understand in a very human-centric way, very like natural, organic way from the way we typically cognitively comprehend our surroundings and time and everything, that there is this continuity of time from what we've understood in the past to what we can sort of anticipate about the future. And that the more we use these tools to inform how we think about these trends and trajectories and inform how we make decisions, the better those decisions are likely to be. And as a bonus, the less uncertain the future feels, or the less scary that uncertainty feels. So it is not so much about, like you said, it's not about predicting the future. It's about really trying to anticipate what we can take inventory of in terms of possible futures, and then prepare for what we think are the most likely or the most damaging, or, the scenarios within that range that really leave us the most exposed and give us the most opportunity.
There's a lot there for our listeners to take away. I just want to start with your being a vegan. That I'm glad the word salads are in harmony. I know this is going to be a great episode because I basically we have only one side of the menu here. It's word salads, and then I require our guests to kind of clean it up. So thank you. So it's nice to know that we're in alignment on all
Yes,
of that.
yeah, absolutely.
You know, Kate, before one anybody, whether they're an executive or on leadership or on the front lines, begins to take a look at the tools and the chaos and the swirl and the shifting sands, isn't what are some thoughts around how, okay, there's so much that I can use. There's so much to do. There's so much, I'm not going to, you got me. I'm not going to predict the future, but I'm going to prepare for it. It seems like there's so much sameness out there. This tool, that tool, this thing. What do you recommend when you consult or when you speak or just, in your daily life? What do you do? Like, how do you distinguish or navigate what works for one?
Yeah, so the model that I introduce in What Matters Next is actually a very real model for me. Like the way I think about the world and the way I have learned to process information and make decisions. And I call it the now next continuum. And it really is this sense of, if you stand sort of think about standing in the present, and you can kind of look to, I guess it would be visually, it would be like you're to your right, like to your right, and that's
Right.
the past, right? Like you're sort of thinking along this timeline. Yeah, exactly. The past is over there. And when you look to the past, you can think about that as information that you know, right? It's known to you, or it's
Yeah.
knowable, right? Like if you don't know, there are ways you can find out, right? Like there are resources, it's facts, it's reports, it's data, right? You can always look and know. But when you look to your left, where the future is, right? And along this timeline, exactly, that's the future over there. What we find is that we don't know anything, but what we can do is trace what we do know and sort of watch it take a trajectory, sort of a dashed through line into the future. And it gives us a sense what's likely to happen. And when
Right.
we start thinking about all those different scenarios, what we can do is ask ourselves objectively, what is the most likely thing to happen out of all these scenarios? And then what is the thing I would most like to see happen? And there is a gap between those two, most likely, right? If there isn't, then lucky you, because you're right in the sweet spot. But if there
Right.
is a
So
gap, which
just right
sorry, go
there
ahead.
in
Yeah.
layman's terms, here's the train, right? You talked about the through
Yeah.
line. So it's information. We're going to be informed by it. We're not going to be anchored by it. And you're
Hmm.
saying, we track it, and here's what's highly likely or
Yes.
a high probability of what could happen.
Yes.
So before I miss this thought, may I intervene with one question
Yeah, of
ish,
course.
salad ish question? Um,
Sure.
because I don't want to, go outside of the vegan world. How do you reconcile that with an open, pure possibility where coming from nothing, you're informed by the past,
Yeah.
you see what you want to prepare for, but at the
Mhm.
same time, using your word, the creative, creation, sometimes you come from nothing. So how do you reconcile that, or is that even a valid question in that
It's a
case?
valid question, but I'm gonna take it a couple different ways here. One of them is to say that you just allow for a possibility that something else happens that you can't anticipate. So that's one of
Okay,
the scenarios, right?
right.
Is just to say,
And
or something else entirely.
that requires a mindset, that requires some
Yeah.
mental fortitude, some management to hold, the possibility of
Yeah.
possibilities coming, okay?
Exactly. An openness, a curiosity, a willingness to say, something else might happen here. But you still would want to be able to say, there's probably some action or decision that I should be taking to ensure that the scenario I would like to see becomes the more likely scenario. I bring it more into fruition. So there are going to be, once I take this inventory of that whole space of the
Hmm.
future scenarios and I find that delta, I always call it the $1,000,000 question is how can I close that gap
Right.
between what I see as my preferred future and the most likely future? And then you're influencing it every day with the decisions that you make and the actions that you take. And I'll just give you an example, of the question you're asking about, the things you can't anticipate, because I think we underestimate what we can anticipate. That is actually part of the model of the now next continuum is that I make this observation in the book that I've never heard anybody else make, so I'm claiming it. We'll see. Maybe somebody will come forward and say, "No, I
We're
heard
making
somebody else say this."
history. Oh my
We're
God, we're
making
making
history right here.
history.
We talk a lot about digital transformation and innovation as if they are synonymous, and they are not. In my view, having been in this space for decades now, what I see is that digital transformation is along the past side of the now next continuum, and innovation is along the future side of the now next
Hmm.
continuum. So what
Okay.
happens is externalities happen, change happens, and you have to move to catch up to where the expectations are, where the market is, what your customers expect you to be able to do, what technology now affords you the possibility of doing. That's digital transformation. Innovation is about standing where you stand in the present, looking into the future and saying, I think I see a way that we could do this differently and nobody else is doing this. We have to figure this out. It's going to be, green space. We have to innovate and ideate and, invent something brand new in this space. So those two are compatible and they should be both happening inside most organizations. But I think it's useful to disambiguate those two ideas and be clear about what it is we're doing at any given point in time.
Yeah. They do get
So
kind of collapsed, you know?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I'm a transformation speaker and an innovation speaker, but I'm not speaking about both of those at the same time most of the time. Most of the time there's an appetite for a different kind of conversation in many organizations. Like most of what we're feeling is attention about, oh, we're launching this whole new automated payroll system and everybody's feeling, a little cringy and there's kind of protectionism going on about different work roles. And so they want to talk more about transformation and culture and, kind of workflow and things like that. Whereas with innovation, we get to explore, the wild ideas and how you rein
Right.
those in and how you think about, ethics and how you think about doing this responsibly and how you bring that into the organization in a practical way. It's a very different
Yeah.
conversation.
Very, very different. And the word transformation is everywhere, and it's I think it's kind of misunderstood. We're
Hmm.
meandering a little bit, but I always try to say, changes, changing the color of the walls in your kitchen. Transforming it is you're moving the sink to the other side, you're pulling
Yeah,
this
yeah,
wall down, you're really like reorganizing on a cellular level,
right.
transformation. I think the status has been lowered because it is a powerful experience when something really does transform.
Yeah,
You're shifting states,
agreed. Yeah,
and
I think we
and
have
I
to
don't
think
mean
about it on a
Arkansas to South Carolina.
No, but I think we do have to bring it back to a more personal understanding of transformation. Like anybody who's been through a transformative life experience, like birth or death, or something like that,
Yeah,
knows how much it completely changes everything in your space, in your environment, and all of your worldviews change. Everything, all your priorities change. And I think that when we think about that as the benchmark for what we mean when we talk about transformation in a more digital or corporate environment, it gives us like, oh, that's what we're really talking about. That's the level we're really playing at. That it's not about painting the walls, as you say. It is completely about we're going to be using all new equipment here. We're going to be changing the way we cook in this kitchen. We move in the kitchen from the front of the house to the back of the house, and it's going to be
right.
wild, right?
To the
Pizza
point
oven
where
and
the food
all.
will be different, the salads will taste
The
different,
salads
but
will
for
taste different.
real, because
Yeah.
change is, I'm not going to say it's easier, but when you talk about culture, just bringing it back to your methodology,
Yeah.
a lot of times when there's innovation or there's implementation of new ideas or new ways or there's new leadership and they put new values in, and it could be, a little bit more in that area of just values and how to inculcate them into the ecosystem of the culture, that still causes anxiousness and everything that you said.
Yeah.
It takes time and it takes a certain mindset.
I hear from leaders a lot about when it comes to AI and automation or any kind of technology, they're like, the thing I'm most nervous about deciding is what if we decide to move our entire platform to this, and then 6 months from now, it's irrelevant because everybody has moved on to something else. And what
Uh,
I find is, to your point about culture and transformation, that the answer is generally you're going to be better off. You're going to be better off for having moved off of the inertia and started planning for that kind of change, because that level of transformation actually takes the sort of movement of culture and the movement of people to get to where you're actually able to bring the kind of workflow changes and process changes and understanding of how systemically this is going to sort of ricochet through the organization. But you won't know that unless you're actually taking inventory of your systems and your processes and things like that. So it becomes easier actually
that's right. Yeah.
to swap in a new system once you're in the process of swapping and replacing and transforming around that. And I just wanted to make sure to bring that point to your audience, because that's a very commonly discussed attribute within this topic.
Yeah. And it connects to the past going to the future where you can be informed, you have the experience of having done it. You can go on. I mean, maybe, alacrity might be a little bit aspirational, but there's more agility and you have
Yeah.
the lived experience. So if we have to move the kitchen to the back of the house, we've done it before. And,
Right.
we kind of know we can anticipate and we're informed by that experience. So
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
super, super important. I want to talk about what, everybody talks about, AI. And, we ask a lot of our guests, not every guest, but a lot of our guests, their take on it. I did want to know, we can do this when we're done with this episode, but is Chat GPT, is Perplexity, are they vegans? I mean, how does that work? I think, is Sophie a vegan? Sophie the robot a vegan?
Well, they're eating
Um,
data, so,
yeah, they
I
they
don't
are eating.
know.
Yeah, it's not very I don't know if it's fiber rich or, too
Right.
too much carbs. I don't know what it is.
They're
They are eating.
datatarians is, I think,
Yeah,
what's happening there.
there you go. They're datatarians. I love it. You heard that word here, Kate O'Neill, registered. So one of the things that you mentioned, you're going to Europe, you speak all over the world, and it's fun. And I know you have a beautiful personality.
Oh,
You
thanks.
really enjoy what you do. I know you've worked with IBM and Coca-Cola and Google and the United Nations, and
That's right.
you do help organizations shape the future in a way that's back to what you do. It's innovative and meaningful. What I've learned from you is you give people something to grasp onto, It's something tangible, it's real, it's applicable, and it has this I don't want to sound so, it has this usefulness to it. I was going to say this utility to it. But with these events that you speak at, you deal every event with meeting professionals,
Mhm.
event marketers, event producers, keynote curators.
Yeah.
What do you see that event professionals, and maybe it's tools, maybe it's not, how this new realm, this new domain, this new horizon of technology in an industry that is so human centered and so reliant on meaningful experiences and meaningful connections. How do you see that being leveraged, being used, being recontextualized? Again, your second serving of word salad.
Yeah, you mean by the event organizers or event planners
Exactly,
themselves?
exactly.
Yeah, I think there's good and bad, right? And I think we're all just learning. We're all sort of figuring out how to use new tools in our workflow and adapt our workflow accordingly. So, to be fair, I think some of this is learning on the job and figuring it out, trial and error, that sort of thing. But I have seen some uses where some of the event planners are seem just as agile as I am with generative AI and maybe able to to whip up a description or something like that right on the fly as we're on a call and we we sort of review it and we can say good to go. That's a
Sure.
great adaptation of my existing topic into something that's a little more tuned to this audience. We're set,
Right.
and that kind of thing
Right.
is easy and smart and a really good use. I have also seen I did this keynote, a virtual keynote a couple of years ago for a group in Ukraine that was about, how Ukraine could rebuild after the war and using tech and AI. And it was a really meaningful thing to be able to do and feel good about. And then one of the organizers used one of these generative AI image tools, like a photo tool, to sort of face tune my headshot. And it came out looking so weird and cartoonish and caricatured. I
Yeah.
looked actually like Aubrey Plaza, which was very strange because I think she's incredible looking and amazing, but I don't look like Aubrey Plaza.
Right. Right.
So it was a really weird moment. And I sent them back a message and I was just like, I think you meant well. And I think this is something that maybe it's even generational because they were much younger, the organizers,
Right.
than I. And
Right.
so they may have thought like this is a thing we're just doing with all our speakers. But I
And
said, if you wouldn't mind, I feel like setting it back to my original headshot just feels more in line with my message and my values and kind of the
right.
integrity of what I'm
Right.
about. And they apologized and put it back and everything. But I think those kinds of things are just when we're going to run up against them. We're going to run up
Yeah.
against the usages and the ways that different people think are appropriate to use tools differently. And we're just going to have to sort that out. We're seeing it a lot with things like automated note takers in Zoom calls and things like that, right? Like people sending in. And I think it's totally understood that people will bring in note takers with them when they're having meetings around like planning an event because I want to make sure I'm catching all the details and I can go
Exactly.
back and replay it or search later when it comes closer to the event. But then there are some instances where people are sort of delegating their attendance to the robot note taker and then not showing up to the meeting, and that feels a little weirdly privileged in a way that's a little insulting to the rest of
Right.
the attendees. So I think it's just stuff like that. We're at
Yeah.
the a transitional point where I think we're just learning the new rules and the new ropes,
Yeah.
with all of this stuff, and we're just gonna have to sort it out as we go.
I want to grab onto that last one, which, is a little bit privileged. And I think it's a little bit, I don't want to be virtue signaling, but I think it lacks integrity if unless you're clear about it and the culture is okay with it. I think, these old school phrases, you have to be present to win, some of these
Yeah,
raffles at these old school Kiwanis Club fairs and stuff in the summer. You can't win unless you're there, right? You have to be
yeah,
present to win. I think what the note takers do is they capture it all and they do a
right.
really incredible job of like synthesizing and putting it in order and stuff. But I'd love your take on this, Kate. Okay. What sometimes or often gets missed is the context
Yeah,
and putting weight on certain things. You and I might be going back and forth with 3 or 4 people on a Zoom and it's capturing it all and everything. But we might have even spoken that we're lukewarm on this. This is a top priority and everything. But what's missing is that human intelligence, the tech humanist, so it's like, I think there's higher premium and a higher value on the human at the same dose that AI is becoming oversaturated into everything that we do. And we're finding our way and we're learning and we're constantly, at least my aspiration is we're constantly trying to refine how we use it and get better and improve. Some are just kind of lazy and plug and play, which is also human. But how do you what are your thoughts on that? That context is decisive, and where that Chat GPT or any of those AI tools miss.
so I think you're giving a really great example, or you're asking this question in the context of a really great example because the note takers provide a really vivid illustration of this. If you think about a situation where maybe I am a busy speaker and the client is only able to have a pre-event call during a time when I'm on stage, and so my assistant goes and I send my robot note taker in my place. And maybe my assistant has asked, Kate likes to bring a dog on stage with her. Is that okay with you? And the event organizer may respond to that like, that's kind of a weird question, right? Like they're thinking that in their head and they
Right.
might go, sure, right? So the transcript says sure. But if you're there in person and you're watching what's going on, you know that was a weird moment. And
That wasn't
obviously
like,
I'm using
sure.
right, right. Of course, that's a totally natural thing for a speaker to want to do, right? And I'm
Right.
using an absurd example because I think, I don't want to call any other thing out, but I think it's the kind of thing that it really benefits us to be tuned in and having that relationship building opportunity when we can. I mean, there are going to be situations like I serve on a few boards and things like that where I can't make every meeting and I get the permission of the organizer, of the board chair, to send my note taker in instead. So at least I'm taking a transcript away so I know what I've missed in the context of the discussion. But I also know that I'm not getting nearly as much value as if I
Right.
had seen the discussion play out or been able to interrupt in real time to say, am I now make sure I understand correctly. Are you saying sure? Or are you saying like, sure? Right?
Right.
I
Right.
think it's the kind of thing that we're gonna see the value of a lot more as we embark upon this next chapter of tech integration into our work.
This is really great stuff. And this is the reason why people come to the podcast and come to our YouTube channel. So thanks. I'd love to ask our viewers and our subscribers, comment and share with us how you're using ChatGPT, how you're dealing with innovation, how you're preparing for the future. Again, I said at the top, we're going to put Kate's book and her speaking profile in the show notes. So you'll be able to learn a lot more about her, get the book. It's awesome. But just thanks for being with us. Kate, taking this further down the road and the example that, we kind of made up here about the dog and the sure and all that, it's, it's a good one. It's like, sure.
Yeah,
Uh,
right.
right, right. Or, okay,
Uh-huh.
okay. Or, it's, it's interesting that those types of human tones and textures are lost or not lost, they're just not included, right? Or they're omitted by, I don't know how that'll be captured maybe in
I
the
mean, they could do
future.
sentiment analysis. It's just not very well integrated into these tools yet. So we have to understand that that's something that's being traded off for
Yeah.
efficiency at this point.
Right. Yeah. It's I'm talking to meeting professionals right now. We have a lot of people that subscribe, business owners and educators at university, and we've had people comment in from high school teachers and all over the place, every industry. But what I've often hear is that at meetings, there's still nothing that takes place of the in-person event and the
Yeah.
in-person keynote speaker. Bear with me here. What's happened is that there are so many meetings and there are so many keynote speakers. And I think what it's become a little bit industrialized.
Hmm.
And people have so many choices to go to a meeting that it sounds a little privileged or snobby or bratty or whatever, but it's like, make me come, like provoke me, have something. I mean, other than having Kate O'Neill come, everybody should go,
No, I
but not
mean,
every event can have Kate O'Neill, right? But the point is
they could
like
try
there's not
though.
right. They could try, they're gonna try, okay, but they can't because not everybody can handle a word salad like the original Kate O'Neill 1.0, right? But where I'm going with this is that, keynotes are falling into the same thing where they've been kind of industrialized. Been kind of like, I wouldn't say commoditized down to like an average or a mean, but the good ones will stand out. And the humanness, I want to bring this all back to the tech, the humanist in you and the meaningful connection. And you hear that word a lot too, but really where people have this, they're square in their hips, they're square in their shoulders, they're looking people in the eye at an event, they're talking about ideas and they're relating in a way where they're kind of providing nutrition for
Mhm.
each other, whether it's
Yeah,
practical or on a more
right.
being level. And that's what we aspire to at the Keynote Curators, bringing in people like you to talk about that and demonstrate that, that's what's the value out there. ChatGPT, learn what matters, prepare for the future. It's all important, but that meaningful connection. I know you feel strongly about this and bringing meaning to the use of technology
Yes.
and preparing for the future. Finish us off with kind of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you. Because I do feel strongly about that. It is an undercurrent of my work is the concept of meaning and human experience and the human condition, that it's fundamental to the human condition. And I have a whole, rant, I guess you could say, a bit in comedic terms about this. But I'll just get straight to the relevant point that you're making about the events, because I feel like we can all understand that there is a time and a place when you need a celebrity, a bookable name, right? Like you need somebody who's going to sell tickets. Everybody understands that, and that's one condition. You also might think of something that's like it's so novel it might be an equivalent to that. We were talking about
Sure.
Sophie the robot, for example. Like maybe that sells tickets. Maybe people are just curious enough that they want to have that experience. But I think if we all think about what it's like for ourselves when we're attending a conference and we watch a keynote, what we're hoping to take away more often than the celebrity impact is I just want there to be something that's like, wow, I can't believe I never thought of it that way. I'm never going to unsee that or unhear that. I'm always going to think of it that way from now on. It's what we were talking about. It's transformative, right? You want
Yeah.
there to be a transformative experience in some way. And sometimes that's achieved by somebody being very funny or entertaining on stage, but often it's achieved by somebody being very, very tuned in to the meaning of the environment that they're in and the context of the discussions that the attendees are there for and the priorities that they have, what they're coming there with, the concerns that's on their mind and their heart. So if you can find somebody who comes to the stage with that level of empathy and cognitive preparation and just the willingness to be very
Yep.
present in the environment, soak it all up and give it all back, and do that in a way that leaves the attendees, I mean, completely overwhelmed. Like, I was there because, it's the opening keynote. I didn't know I was going to get like a life-changing experience out
Right.
of it.
Right.
I think that's what everybody's looking for. And it's really hard to hire for, admittedly. Like that's a tough thing, but that's why you have people like Seth.
Well, no, thank you. And the inverse of that, thank you. I mean, look, words matter, you know,
Mm,
right? And a
yeah.
speech can change a life,
Yeah.
and whether it's somebody who's taken a trauma, albeit inconceivable on a personal level, and has the mastery and the skill to gift that story away, not make it about them and transform and leave you in a
Right.
different place. And like you say, you can't unsee it or you can't
Yeah.
unhear it or both. I think they mean the same thing in the spirit of what I'm saying, see and
Yeah.
hear.
Right.
But
Metaphorically.
that's really the art and the mastery of it. And it's not just like take an order, oh, we have $5, we want this topic, and
Right.
we want somebody from, North America or whatever. Just that there are buyers out there, but I think that as the speaking industrial complex expands, what's going to stand out, what's going to rise to the above the mean is exactly what you said. That aha moment, and it could be one moment. Rest is not a reward, it's a resource.
Yeah.
I heard that one the other day and I was
That's
like,
a good
dude,
one.
like that, like, I'm not going to say like my life was altered, like there's an inflection point, but that made me stop and be like, totally. Like,
Was that
na-
Dr. Robin Defoe Hanley, or who was that?
it was
Do you remember?
Sunil Gupta.
Oh, okay. All right. Awesome.
Lovely, lovely build up. We talked a lot about energy and being in the red and the blue, but it was like, yeah, I need to rest. It's like, but are you going into that rest? Like, what is your intention?
Yeah.
And it's not like you have to be overly freaking consciously thinking and overworking, like, I'm going to rest and this is my intention. But if you can baseline it and inhabit what your intention is without being consciously having to think about it, it becomes more restorative, more regenerative, more kind of what it was intended to do.
Yeah,
So,
and I think some of that starts with even during the vetting process. I've had a number of these kind of calls, the pre-sales call, pre-booking call with clients where you can sort of tell that you're on the right page or whatever. And I had one next week. I have the event where the lead up to it, the first few calls I had, they actually had a lot of the management team on the call, which was really surprising. I don't often experience that. It's
right.
usually the event planner, maybe there's an executive of some sort. But they had a lot of the leadership team, and I thought, oh, this tells me something right away, right? They're really invested. They want the right message out there, the right experience. They want it to be a reflection of their deeper values and what they're about as a company. And it was a really fun call because they're all really smart and passionate and committed people. And so we got through that call, and then we had actually one more. And on that second call, I said something at one point. I go like, I get the impression that it's a really good thing that I don't work for you guys because we would never get anything done. We'd be just nerding out, talking intellectual stuff all day. And they laugh.
Right.
They're like, "You're on to us."
They're like, oh my God, we got found out.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's like when you understand the DNA of an
Yeah.
organization through those
Yeah.
calls, and you can tell not only is the speaker going to be able to deliver their speech, right? But that these are professionals who now understand each other, and that you can transact in this business, in this context, knowing that the all important purpose and values are going to be safely shepherded through the process. And
Yeah.
I think that's the thing that more than anything, most event organizers and those booking events like really, really want. And that's what, as a professional keynote speaker, we want to be able to deliver that well for you that you're like, God, wasn't that just the best thing? You know?
Yeah. I mean, look, guidance in that sense, like being the Sherpa, the squire, or even your
Hmm.
mayordomo, like it helps because it's not like over inundate me, send me your values, send me your mission statement, but let's talk it
Right.
through. I personally, I've been doing this for 20 years plus. I, when I can, and I try to have 100% attendance record, I like to be on the calls myself too with the
Yeah.
speaker. Sometimes I do the introduction, sometimes not. It's not like I'm lurking or anything. I want to hear how you, Kate, are responding, and
Right.
it allows me to represent you better in the
Yeah.
future.
Yeah. I think
And
so.
I want to hear how my client is operating, and words that they're using so it can help me serve them in the future. And in the
100%.
wild case that I need to kind of intervene lightly,
Right.
I will. Or if I know the client really well and the speaker really well, there's something that I could provide that could, deepen a little bit. Just yesterday, I was on a call. I was on a red eye. I made the call. I landed. I was able to get to the office. I made the call. And they've very big Fortune 100 company. The CEO there was a lot of leadership changes. CEO is no longer there. There's new, and that's in the mood. And
Hmm.
nobody really
Hmm.
spoke to it.
Right.
So I felt compelled to just say, hey, look. And said to the client, I said, look, if I'm overreaching here, overstepping, by no means, please, stop me or whatever. But I think it's important in the big picture level, at least, to say the sands have shifted. There's a little bit of turbulence and a little bit of unsettled. And they were like, yes, actually, I'm really glad you said that. And then the speaker did a quick Google while I was on the call. He's like, oh, yeah, okay. Is there anything that is a no-go? And to say or mention. And he
Yeah.
was like, I was really glad you brought that up. So I think that
Yeah.
we weren't nerding out like you, which I'm jealous,
It's,
but,
it's fun. It's fun.
it was serving.
But it was serving. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that kind of thing is underappreciated. I think when you have a consultative approach, I'm a consultant and an advisor. So, I bring that mindset too. But a lot of people who even aren't formally consulting, they bring a consultative approach to their work. So I think it's that willingness to say there's an uncomfortable thing to be said, but it really needs to be said because otherwise we won't get to the truth, and the truth is what is going to be useful here. There's another
Definitely.
one of the values of the company I ran before I started KO Insights, the company I now run. I had a company called Meta Marketer, and my team and I came up with our value statements together. And one of the values that we articulated was not only speak truth to power, because we do think that's a really important value, but with an addendum on that, speak truth to power, but confront with compassion. And I feel like a lot of times people assume that people who are in power seats or in leadership positions are, sort of bulletproof, or they have no feelings about what they're dealing with. And I think it's really important to go into these kinds of situations with a lot of empathy and understanding for the difficulty of the
Yeah.
role and how much sort of psychic energy is involved in the process. So to
So
come
much.
to that with that kind of approach, like you described, to be able to say, listen, I'm kind of hearing something like, can we call it out and talk about what's going on here? I think it's a real service that you did in
Yeah.
that call. And it was a real service to the speaker too, to be able to name it and work with it.
Yeah. And that's why we're the curators, Kate.
Mhm.
You know, I can't help it. You know, this is so you're like the National Merit Scholar, gray matter. And I'm like, I'm not the short bus, but I'm certainly on the pedestrian level. So KO Insights, I'm like, God, why would she name it Knockout? Like,
Oh,
is
I've
she
heard that
into like,
so many
is she
times.
into like buy? And then I'm like, duh, KO.
But I own the domain knockoutinsights.com too, because I've heard it so often. And I was
Yeah.
like, you know what? I got to protect this
All right, Sugar
in
Ray
case somebody
Leonard,
comes in.
don't call KO because
Right.
she's already got it. Manny
But
Pacquiao,
it's
back
just
off,
like
okay?
when I was at Netflix, we used to own the netflixxx.com domain as well, because they didn't want anyone else coming in on that
Mhm.
domain. Like they
Yeah,
never did anything with it. They just squatted on it. But it was like that kind of protection of
right.
your IP is really important. So I thought it's
Just
not
don't let
quite
it
Netflix
expire.
XX, but yeah,
Don't let it expire, right? Because
right.
they're there waiting.
But it also made
Well,
for a really funny joke on bad days at Netflix. We would all go like, "I think it's time to start the XX today."
right. We need a new business line. We need a new
Right.
channel. We need a new revenue channel that has immediate impact.
Yes.
Well, Kate, we've come to the end of our current impact. We're
Aw.
going to pick it up with you. Yeah, I'm feeling knocked out. No, I'm kidding. This was great. You know, you just got such a generous spirit about you, and I know
Thank you.
well, you're welcome. It's true, and you make a difference, and you can feel it and hear it in just this conversation and how you approach everything. And I know you do that not only the past to the right, but in the future to those that you're going to yet impact and touch. They're fortunate to have you in their ear and in their gray matter, and that these ideas wash over because they're impactful and they're meaningful. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Seth. What a great conversation this has been. And I really appreciate you having me on here.
You're very welcome. And lastly, not least, to our listeners and viewers, thank you again. We appreciate you being with us. We're here for you. Check us out on the website, thekeynotecurators.com, and we'll see you next time.